Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this seminar. It's the third time we organize jointly with the United States Embassy in Madrid and, of course, with Es Global in this program called Defensa y Yo. This is the third time we organize this seminar here. For us, for Raquel and me, it's a very important issue to organize this kind of seminars in the faculty. And of course, it's significant for us because it was the first act in flesh. We organized here after the pandemic. And then this is something that we are going to remember during a long time. And we are very happy you came and you are interested in these issues. And we are going to talk today about NATO and the different scenarios NATO is facing today. It's a very interesting and very important issue in this new international realm we are involved, everybody. And I would like to thank to the embassy, to Nicole, to be here. He is going to introduce our speaker. And later we are going to talk a little bit, Raquel and me, also about these scenarios. This might mean China, Russia, and the Greater Magreb. And then at the end, you can join us in the debate and make whatever questions you have. And finally, Es Global is going to introduce and inform you about what means Defensa y Yo and what is the program and the steps to participate in that program. And I'm finished here, and I let the floor to Nicole to introduce our speaker. Thank you very much, Nicole. Floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Nicole Callahan, and I'm a diplomat from the U.S. Embassy in Madrid. I just want to thank you all for being here, and I especially want to thank your professors for caring about this program and being such active participants in it. The goal of this program is to create a culture amongst Spain's next leaders who care about issues related to security and defense. And this program is one of our ways of helping to build that awareness and that concern for security and defense issues. So I'm very happy to have here today Mr. Luke Coffey. He is a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. His work there, he analyzes national security and foreign policy with a focus on Europe, Eurasia, NATO, and transatlantic relations. Previous to his work at the Hudson Institute, he was also at the Heritage Foundation, where he was their director of the Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies. He also has a very unique distinction of being the first non-UK citizen to serve in a position advising the British Ministry of Defense, which I find fascinating and could be a whole other conference for me. And he also has a military history serving with the US Army in the United States. So we're very happy that he's able to join us, and I'll turn the floor over to him now as well.
Thank you, Nicole, for that introduction. And I want to thank the U.S. Embassy in Madrid and the Complutense University of Madrid for co-hosting this event today and inviting me to speak. It's a great pleasure and honor. I love talking about NATO. Admittedly, a lot of my focus when I talk about NATO is a couple thousand kilometers to the east, along the frontier with Russia and Ukraine. But I am a firm believer that we have to look at the alliance as a whole. And that's, we have to be ready to defend Spain in the same way we would be ready to defend Estonia, for example. So we can't ignore different regions of the alliance because we might think it's convenient or easy to do. And that's why I'm honored to speak here today about NATO's security challenges and NATO's approach to North Africa. It's also a pleasure to share a panel with two distinguished experts on this issue, and I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot from them as well throughout this discussion. But I wanted to give the perspective from an American's point of view. You don't need me to tell you why North Africa is important. You know this, especially being in Spain, where you are located, and with your history, your historical, geographical, economic connections to the Maghreb and to the North African region. But I want to give you why I think it's important for NATO, and hopefully you will agree. The most obvious reason why I think the North African region matters for NATO is because many of the problems and the instability and the unpredictability that emerges in North Africa often finds its way into Southern Europe in some form or another, whether it's through the flow of irregular migration, counter transnational terrorism, transnational criminal activity. We see how what happens in North Africa can quickly impact the rest of Europe. And it's also a matter of geography. Back, in antiquity, North Africa and Southern Europe around the Mediterranean Sea was viewed as one geographical political space. And I think perhaps they were onto something back in antiquity on this matter. There have been prominent geographers throughout history who have argued that Europe's southern border is not Italy or Greece, for example, but it's where the Sahara Desert begins. That is the southern border of Europe. And I think sometimes we take a very lazy approach, and we take a cartographer's view of the world, looking at a map as we have it today, without recognizing how many of these different regions are closely interconnected. But this region also matters to NATO because NATO's founding document tells us this. It doesn't explicitly say North Africa. The 1949 North Atlantic Treaty doesn't explicitly name any countries in North Africa, but Article 6 of the 1949 North Atlantic Treaty that states where NATO's area of responsibility is, says it's in the North Atlantic area, north of the Tropic of Cancer. And if you look at a map, all the countries in North Africa are clearly above the Tropic of Cancer. So if you interpret what the founding document says literally, then one has to consider the importance and the geopolitical implications of North Africa when it comes to NATO's security and stability. But finally, and I would say most importantly, the reason why North Africa should matter to NATO as an institution is because it matters to its member states in the South, like Portugal, Spain, France, Italy, etc. If it matters to you, it should matter to the rest of us. Now, there are several challenges that NATO has when it comes to dealing with the issues in North Africa and how it impacts the rest of the alliance. The first one is there's a lack of focus or attention on this region for NATO. That's why I was so excited to speak here today. I've written a bit, not very much compared to the other panelists, but I've written a bit on what NATO can do to improve its relationships with North Africa and why it's important. But you don't hear very much about this, especially at the NATO level. Last summer, NATO published its most recent strategic concept. The strategic concept is a document meant to guide NATO's policymakers into the future on the threats and challenges that NATO faces. that policy document, that strategic concept was about 4,200 words long. Okay, 4,200 words long. Out of the 200 words, only 80 words were devoted to either North Africa or the Middle East. Just 80 words. There was no mention at all in that strategic concept of the Mediterranean dialogue, which I'm sure many of you know is NATO's primary platform to engage with the countries of North Africa. The Mediterranean dialogue was not mentioned even once. So there's just no understanding or institutional appreciation on why this region is important. But also, I think NATO has some institutional shortcomings on how to deal with the challenges in North Africa. So it chooses to ignore the region because it's too difficult to figure out a good strategy going forward. For example, many of the challenges coming from North Africa to NATO are from, as I said, irregular migration, transnational crime, transnational terrorism. These are all challenges and threats that NATO lacks the policy competencies to deal with. NATO doesn't have a law enforcement body. NATO doesn't have the authority to levy economic sanctions or freeze bank accounts. NATO doesn't have a Coast Guard. I think it's completely reasonable to wonder if the use of a $1 billion warship to patrol the seas to stop irregular migrants is good value for money and a good use of that capability. You know, NATO has the warship. What it really needs is the Coast Guard or the border force. And this is why it's important that we understand NATO's limitations on what it can do in the North Africa, these institutional shortcomings. And instead of trying to make NATO something that it never was designed to be, we should figure out ways NATO can work with on a multilateral basis, on a bilateral basis, or an institution to institutional basis, such as NATO and the EU, to deal with some of these challenges coming from North Africa that perhaps fall inside of a gray area when it comes to what NATO is designed to do and what it can do. So I just outlined why I think North Africa is important and what the challenges are for the alliance in dealing with this region. Now I want to offer some suggestions. I'm always a believer that if you highlight a problem, you should at least make some recommendations on how to fix this problem. And I have a series of recommendations that I think could help get NATO more focused on North Africa. The first one is for NATO to appoint a special representative for the North Africa, Middle East regions. I think in this part of the world, personal relationships matter greatly. And NATO has special representatives for other regions of the world. And I think it would be a good idea for the countries of North Africa to perhaps have one single point of contact with the alliance that they can use to continue a dialogue that's ongoing. The second thing we need to do is use the Mediterranean dialogue more effectively. I follow NATO issues very closely. I cannot remember the last time that there has been a NATO +7 Mediterranean dialogue meeting. NATO plus the 7 members of the MD. Certainly at the ministerial level, perhaps at the officials level, there has been one in recent times, but at the ministerial level, I don't know when the last time this has happened. We should be meeting in this very important format. I would even argue that we should have a NATO +7 Mediterranean dialogue meeting at the heads of state and heads of government level at a NATO summit. This has never happened, other than in 1994 when the Mediterranean dialogue was created. So, 3 decades now, almost 3 decades ago. So let's think about getting the heads of government, heads of state around the table from the region to at least symbolically show that NATO means business, that NATO wants to engage and discuss what's happening in the region. NATO, I think, needs to work more closely with the European Union on this issue of North Africa because of the reasons I highlighted before. Many of the challenges that NATO countries face from North Africa, the institution of NATO lacks the ability or the competencies to deal with. But in many cases, the EU does have the ability to deal with some of these challenges, and certainly the member states have the ability. So there has to be more consultation, both at the EU level, but also amongst the member states inside NATO. And then we need to engage, speaking of the EU, we need to engage more with Malta in this sense. Malta, of course, is a member of the EU, but not a member of NATO. But as Nicole mentioned in her kind introduction of me, I used to work for the British Defense Secretary, and I was at the Ministry of Defense in London during the time of the so-called Arab Spring and NATO's military intervention in Libya. And I learned how crucial Malta is for regional stability and security, and how desperately NATO needed access to Maltese airspace and water and airfields in order to conduct such an operation like NATO did over the skies of Libya. So it would be great to see NATO create some sort of institutional relationship with Malta. Malta is not going to join NATO. I don't think anyone is advocating for this possibility, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't engage with Malta. We also have to, as we engage more with the countries in North Africa, NATO needs to do so at a pace and at a speed and at a level that is comfortable for each individual country. NATO cannot take a one-size-fits-all approach to its engagement in North Africa. Each individual country is going to have a different context, a different historical relationship with certain NATO member states, a different level of economic relationship with Europe. We have to consider these individually and then tailor our engagement and our relationships with the individual countries. So while the Mediterranean dialogue works great as a strategic approach, I think we also need to be more tactical in our engagement as well. And then finally, we need to find ways to fly the NATO flag in North Africa in a way that is in with cooperation and with engagement of our North African partners. Two ideas that I have had on this is to create a center of excellence in a North African country, a NATO certified center of excellence. If you're not familiar with this structure, centers of excellence in NATO are created in different NATO member states to focus specifically on a single issue. For example, Estonia is home to the Center of Excellence for Cybersecurity. Latvia is home to the Center of Excellence for Countering Disinformation, and so on and so on. There's about 20, 25 or so different centers of excellence across NATO. There has never been a NATO Center of Excellence outside of a NATO member state, but there's no legal obstacle from preventing this happening. So I think we need to get creative, and we need to consult and engage with a country in North Africa and say, hey, what is a shared security concern that you have with NATO? Let's say it's the impact of irregular migration. And then we work together to create a NATO certified center of excellence in one of these countries in North Africa that can serve as a hub for regional countries and European countries to come together and collaborate and work on a specific issue. The other idea I have for getting NATO's flag flying in the region is the creation of a Mediterranean dialogue regional center. This would be based off the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative Regional Center in Kuwait. Now, the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative is another platform that NATO has, but used to engage with primarily Gulf countries, the Gulf states in the Middle East. And a few years ago, NATO set up this regional center in Kuwait to serve as the go-to place, the center point of contact for NATO and regional cooperation in the Gulf. And I think it would be fantastic if we had something like this in North Africa. I know a few years ago, there was talk about creating this intelligence, joint intelligence sharing cell in Tunisia. That never materialized for a number of reasons. I think a lot to do with domestic politics in Tunisia. And that goes back to my earlier point about making sure we propose things and we work with regional countries at a speed that they are comfortable with. And I think maybe we could find a willing partner in North Africa to establish a NATO regional center. I think that'd be a good start. Anyway, that was a lot for me to go over in just a short amount of time. I hope I said something that maybe will spark some questions or some discussion. And I look forward to hearing from the audience, but also hearing from my two fellow panelists as well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Look, we are going first to talk, Raquel and me, and then offer the floor to the students now, and in order to have more information for them and to put together all the questions. If not, maybe we are going to allow too much the seminar. I would like to talk a little bit about our issues. In fact, because we have been working in NATO issues and about all in the North Africa and Sahel. But I'm not going to talk about that because Raquel is going to talk about that. It's the real expert here. And I'm going to talk about certain issues because I find some of the current debate in NATO about the strategic concept very interesting. First of all, because a lot of issues has been developed during the creation of this new strategic concept, and maybe this debate open certain new visions for NATO and for the allies, I think. First of all, the issue of China, the issue of the Indo-Pacific, and of course the issue of Russia, but from a certain point of view, if I can say that. Well, but first of all, it was interesting because we were with another colleague. We were in NATO headquarters a couple of months ago, no, 1 month ago, and we had the opportunity to met a lot of people there with a set of briefings about some of I think the most important issues now about NATO in relations with Russia, the problem of the war in Ukraine, but also issues like a nuclear policy, cyber threat, and of course the intelligence issue, and of course the Magreb or the North Africa issue. Well, it's important for me to talk about some of these points because we later we can launch the conversation and the questions, because it's very interesting that in the last, for instance, talking about the issue of Asia, is the first time that in the Madrid summit, certain head of government from Asia came to the summit, and this means that some of these countries are very interested in the action of NATO, see NATO more than only North Atlantic Treaty. I think see NATO in another way, and see NATO like a strong partner in this defense of this liberal international order. And I think it's one of the main issues here. And of course, I'm very interested in some conversation we have with Carmen Romero about this issue. Carmen Romero is Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy, and I was very interested also in this issue. Well, some of you in class, we have been talking about that in Asia Pacific classes or in American foreign policy yet, not yet, but we are going to talk a lot about that and the interest in the Pacific. Well, I think this is a very interesting issue because NATO is opening his thinking to this collaboration with these countries, and some of them are very interesting. The Japan, South Korea, Australia are very interested in collaborating with NATO and to cooperate in certain areas very deeply. In fact, South Korea and Japan has been developing these links during the last years. And I think this is something we have to talk more about, because to certain points, some countries in Europe are not in this mood or are not very much involved in that. Spain is one of them. We don't have this kind of Indo-Pacific strategy. Other countries in Europe have, like France or Germany or even Holland and other countries. And then I think Spain should put more interest in that kind of vision for the future. And in the other hand, for me, it was also very interesting to talk about nuclear policy and hybrid threats. Why? Because, well, the hybrid threats is something like in Spain, we talk a lot about that. And we are very interested in the policy of NATO and the Center of Excellence, etc. But the issue of nuclear policy, it's a more difficult issue for talking in Spain, and even with the people in class, or even with experts. There is no interest, or to certain point, there is a matter of certain fear to talk openly about this issue. Well, I think this is important because for the first time in a lot of years, we are going to see in the European space the destruction of some of the main treaties of disarmament, like Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty, and start to be some weeks ago start to be problems with the verification teams about the New START treaty on strategic nuclear weapons. And this means that nuclear weapons start to rise like a new, but a very, very important issue, and the threats by Putin about nuclear use, etc., etc. I think we had to take into account these issues and talk more about nuclear issues, of course, and related with these issues of hybrid threats. Why? Because to a certain point, the new strategic approach of NATO is more or less this kind of integrated deterrence. And this is, in fact, is integrated all this issue in the ability of NATO to face these threats and challenges. We had to start to think in that way in security issues in Spain, and about all because we have this kind of approach, very focused sometimes in common human security issues. I think these issues are rising in importance for Spanish security, but also, of course, for European and NATO security. And I think we have to talk more about that and take more care of these issues. Of course, North of Africa and Sahel has been rising during the last years. Probably for Spain is one of the main issues in security matters, as Luke said. In every issue you can think is important, and is the vital interests of Spain are very involved in this area. Raquel is going to talk about that. We have been working on that during the last years, so publishing a couple of books and a lot of articles on that, with seminars in around the world, talking about our vision about what is going on in North Africa and Sahel, and with a particular vision of how to manage these problems in the area, and also with a different point of view at the time to talk to NATO, and it's been very interesting the points that Luke raised, and I think it's a matter of debate, very interesting, because we have several issues also to rise here about what's going on in North Africa and Sahel, and how European countries and NATO as an alliance can face that kind of problems. Of course, as he said, first of all is politically rise the level of the issue in NATO. I think in spite of the declaration on the issue of 360 vision, all the threats are important, are at the same level. After the crisis and the invasion of Ukraine, we thought that the North of Africa and Sahel has been put in a little bit aside in this issue, and in long term for a lot of countries in Europe and for NATO, I think it's a very important threat for the security. Is of course in other ways that the Russian actions in Ukraine are, but we have to put this interest in political level to discuss very deeply in NATO about what is going on and the problems of the intervention of the Russians and Chinese in North Africa and Sahel. Something that not very much is talking in certain issues. Well, I don't want to talk more, because I think Raquel is better suited than me to talk about that, and then I'm going to pass the floor to her, and we are going to later debate a little bit about these issues. And then Raquel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the US Embassy, to Es Global, and of course to the speakers and also the attendants and the students coming to this activity. After the interesting talks of our guest, Luke Coffey, I want, and also Professor Cantalapiedra, I want to go in deeper on Maghreb, NATO, or Greater Maghreb, as a secondary scenario of NATO. The history of NATO regarding the South is less important if we compare with the East. For years, NATO's southern flanks was considered a piece of territory in the NATO neighborhood, with a lack of relevance regarding the East and the menace coming from the East. And now, and of course, before February, 1 year ago was less, and also after Crimea in 2014, all the NATO members look again to the east with more worrying than to the south. However, as Professor Cantalapiedra says, change occurred in the international system, the securitization of the international agenda, and also the impact of Russian and Chinese challenge about the international system and the current status quo, the pandemic. All these aspects are creating a deep systemic transformation with uncalculated consequences also in the south and also in the Mediterranean. Regarding the Mediterranean, Professor Cantalapiedra and me, we are working a long time ago about a new approach to the region, and we consider that security synergies are changing in the region and volatilize the MENA region. And we found in one hand the Middle East with different synergies, completely different. We found the Gulf states with other problems, also the Middle East countries. And then we found that we call this North Africa and the Greater Magreb. We put inside North Africa, also the Sahel, and also the West Africa. We found the same problems and the same security challenge in this big new area. For this approach, we use the theoretical model, regional security complex of Barry Busan and Olaf Weber, because we identify these trends. Terrorism, we also found organized crime overspread in the region, and also the irregular migration fluxes. So this is the first point that we want to say, that is to change the lenses to look to the area. There is no more MENA, and it's Middle East with the specific problems, and this Greater Maghreb, this big North Africa. In this sense, and going like our speaker says before, we found terrorism as the most important threat in the region. I can explain or just name the different groups that overspread in the region, and they are fighting, growing, changing. We found Jenim, Jama al-Nusra al-Islam wal-Muslim, Mujao, Acme, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, that is now one of the most important threats because change the approach and is doing or is working with the small katibas overspread in the territory. Then we found the Islamic State of the Greater Sahara, another terrorist group, Al-Morabitun, that is working together with the organized crime groups in the region. We found also independent movements in the north region of Mali, for instance, in Al-Sawasat, with another groups. So all these different terrorist groups are creating instability, most of that. The worst regions now is in the Western Sahel, that we call Western Sahel, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. The Triple Frontier was one of the worst regions. Also the Chadic region, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Niger. It's also a hotspot area. Then we found organized crime, transnational organized crime, and crime syndicates working and also operating in the old region, and mostly in the West African countries. Also, we found intra-community and pastoral violence among different ethnic groups and communities that these are interconnected threats. Then we also found non-state actors that trying to provide services to the population, to the local population. And then also we found another multiples of these threats, such as climate change, the irregular migration, smuggling people, and also trafficking of human beings. Then we found in the region resource scarcity of water, scarcity of land for the cattle. So at the end of the day, we found a lot of non-state actors and also non-conventional threats. Another issue that worrying particularly to the European countries is the demographic boom in these countries. We found exodus linked to the demographic boom and this scarcity of resources, and forecasts by 2050 say to us that the population will get the double. So we again will find in the common years a place with the structural problems that I don't want to talk about, but lack of governments that we call ungoverned areas. There is no the inexistence of a state. Perhaps is there are some parts of the territory that the state can control, and these non-state actors start to work over there with the population. In addition, we find other instability factors, such as the presence of other small regional countries. For instance, the powers of the medium powers of the Persian Gulf. We found that they are fighting for the influence in the region, in the diplomatic and also in the economic sphere. So, for instance, this is just an example: the Saudi Arabia summit and the Tehran presence, and also the Turkey diplomacy, and also penetration, arms sales, for instance, in Libya. Or we found also in Mali religious confrontations between the Sunnis and the Shiites. Iran is building a world system of internship for the Malians and students, and taking them to study to Iran. And for on the other hand, we found Saudi Arabia that is building a lot of mosques, of course, with the Salafist imams, for this another vision, or for offer another vision of the Islam. And we also find now the penetration of Iran in countries like Malawi, Namibia, and Tanzania. So we see that the influence of these countries is also overspread in the region. Then international community, of course, is doing things, and is a lot of worry about the situation, particularly about the instability that project this region. We have also a lot of initiative, G5 Sahel, the French operation that finished Serval first, and then Barkhane, that is over. Then the AFISMA, that is led by the ECOWAS, MINUSMA of the United Nations, in Mali, Canada supporting another missions, and of course we found European missions in Mali and Niger. The problem, all of these things, is that there are a lot of acronyms that indicates that the Sahel, the North Africa, the Greater Magreb is a issue that concerns, but as our colleague said, NATO and neither other organizations know how to deal with. So that's the real problem. A lot of resources, a lot of money, a lot of also military intervention. But at the end of the day, we found Bamako surrounded in these days. And also, for instance, Burkina Faso is close to the civil war. So that we read this morning. So of course, it's a problem. Or for instance, and it's far away, Mozambique with a lot of terrorist attacks. So Africa, worry. Regarding the NATO southern flank and the future, and of course the 2000, the new strategic concept. I'm also study about the the number of words in the strategic concept, and I found that there are only 2 paragraphs that talk about the Middle East, MENA, and the Sahel, and in one of them, in the 45. It was included as in another big region, so nothing specifically to the south. It is true that in Spain, and of course because the summit was held in Madrid, so politically it was sold as a huge picture, and for the first time we include the south in 2 paragraphs. But when you go deeper, you found that there is nothing like our speaker exposes. So it was worrying that or I feel that we lost this opportunity to focus more in the south, taking this NATO 360 approach, etc. So we found also regarding this strategic concept and also to the future of the alliance, this tension between the south and the west and the east that we found some years ago, and also when we were in Brussels in the NATO headquarters. Of course, we understand the situation, and we understand that the Russia is a conventional threat, and it's easy to see about the situation. And again, in the south is an unconventional also threats and non-state actors. So it's more difficult to face this situation. Again, and also we ask about one thing that we think that is important regarding the NATO southern flank, and is the NATO southern members, and particularly the issue of Turkey. Turkey is called the cold Turkey question. The geopolitical position across Europe, Asia, and Africa provides NATO a huge operational theater. So we understand that it's difficult to say something to Turkey behavior inside the alliance, but it's true that also there are some things that are worrying. So again, we found, and if we take in the NATO charter and the democracy values, etc., we found that maybe NATO is being very realistic in this sense, because Turkey cares. And I don't want to go deeper to the relationship with the European Union, but we can find, and also inside NATO, this that I feel a little bit worried about. We found this discourse about, okay, the South for the Europeans, because European Union knows how to deal with, and I'm very worried because European Union nowadays has no really military force and the capacity that NATO has. So it's another point that I'm concerned. And finally, I think that NATO, after Ukraine 1 year ago, is again in the middle of every security discussion. It's like I don't want to say this like this, but it's like a revival of NATO that when a lot of time ago talking about how is NATO is dying, and now it's NATO revival. So and the good thing of NATO is that more countries like Sweden and Finland want to join NATO. So it's not that NATO called to the doors, it's that countries called to the NATO doors. So that's another thing that we need to put also in value inside the alliance, and maybe must to be used in the international system as in this uncertain world, as Professor Cantalapiedra said, with China as a systemic challenger, and Russia, assertive Russia, NATO could be or must be a tool, an interesting tool for the this century, for the security of this century.
Thank you, Raquel. I don't know if Luke, do you want to say something or make some comments, or prefer to start the questions with the students? If the students have any question, I hope so.
Yeah, I would love to open it up to the students. One of my favorite things about doing these events is the engagement with the audience. So hopefully they have some good questions.
Okay, then we have a microphone around.
My name is Angela. First of all, thanks for this interesting speech. I have 3 simple questions for Mr. Coffey. First, as Macron said in 2019, NATO was brain dead. How is it now? The second is, why is it important now to add members like Morocco or Tunisia to the organization? Are we set on a new Cold War and that's why we need allies? And third and last, do all members agree on adding countries of Northern Africa? For instance, Spain has territorial problems with Morocco and the recognition of the Sahara colony. In my opinion, our diplomatic relations are really complicated to trust as NATO members. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take the brain dead question last. I'll deal with your 2 other questions first. I was not advocating for any country in North Africa to join as a member the alliance. In fact, it's legally impossible. If you read Article 10 of the 1949 North Atlantic Treaty, Article 10 is the section that deals with enlargement, adding new members. It's very explicit. It states that you have to be a European country to join NATO. Sometimes here in America, we hear this discussion about Mexico joining, because of course Canada is a member, America, United States, it's a member. Why not Mexico? Well, for starters, the treaty wouldn't allow it. So for the same reasons, I don't think that any country in North Africa should join NATO. But there's a huge policy space between being a member of NATO and doing nothing at all to engage with a country. And that's where we need to be in the middle of these 2 extremes. We need to work, NATO as an institution needs to work with the countries of North Africa for the reasons I outlined. We have so many shared security concerns. We have to do so in a way that is comfortable for not only the members of NATO, but also the members of the Maghreb and the broader region. And it's in our interest to do so. I was advocating for, expanding the relationship or building on the relationships that already exist between NATO and the region, but I wasn't advocating for bringing in new members from North Africa. However, I am a large supporter of NATO enlargement. I don't think there's been any greater tool to promote stability, democracy, good governance, economic reforms in Europe than the prospect of joining NATO. The prospect of joining NATO has encouraged many countries to reform and to change, and I think that's been a positive thing. The problem for NATO is that there are few countries left that can join, and the ones that are left come with a lot of problems. Obviously, Georgia, Ukraine, Bosnia and Herzegovina. These are complicated situations. Finland and Sweden is a little more straightforward, but as we have seen recently with Turkey, it's not quite as easy as we thought it was going to be. But I think the principle of adding new members to the alliance is a positive one. Remember, we don't force anyone to join the alliance. They do so willingly. I think that's an important distinction to make compared to how Moscow approaches this issue, where Moscow cannot live with the idea that Ukraine might join the European Union or join NATO. They can't tolerate that idea. So then we see what happens. They invade and partially occupy, their neighboring countries. On your first question about Macron saying that NATO is brain dead, well, NATO's had some challenges, without a doubt. NATO is not a perfect alliance. I think I'll tell you what's brain dead now, and that's the concept of strategic autonomy in Europe. I think after Russia's invasion of Ukraine last year, that idea, that concept is brain dead. But I think NATO has this new opportunity to re-energize its mission, its purpose. And I think that Russia has caused this situation. We can thank Russia for this. We can thank Russia for increased defense spending. We can thank Russia for NATO taking its security obligations in Eastern Europe more seriously. So I wouldn't say it's brain dead, but I would certainly agree with President Macron that we have had some problems in the past with the alliance. Thank you.
Thank you. More questions? Ode?
As we have seen in Turkey with now the problems that Turkey is having with accepting some new members to the NATO, how does the NATO talk and resolve problems with its members? For example, many of the countries that participate in the NATO are recognizing the Serbian region of Kosovo and Spain no. For example, how does the NATO resolve or solve these problems with the member states?
Good question. I think the important point to remember is that as an intergovernmental security alliance, every opinion matters. And we have to consider every point of view and every opinion. And that's just the reality. We may not like it. It may be cumbersome. It may slow down the process of decision making, but this is the nature of a security alliance. And you mentioned two examples, Turkey, when it comes to Finland and Sweden joining the alliance. I think Turkey has legitimate concerns about the PKK and certain extremist groups. And also, I think President Erdogan is a very capable politician. So he's using this genuine concern to his fullest advantage to try to get as many concessions as possible from different members of the alliance. At the end of the day, this isn't about Turkey and NATO. This is really about Turkey and the United States and Turkey's concerns about support for the Syrian Kurds, the YPG, which is the Syrian branch of the PKK. And these issues have to be heard out. We have to work with Turkey on these issues. I am confident that we'll see Sweden and Finland inside the alliance. I think deep down, when I speak to Turkish officials privately, deep down they know that Turkey or that Finland and Sweden bring advantages to the alliance. Turkey, paradoxically, has been one of the strongest and loudest supporters of NATO enlargement over the years. I mean, they've been advocating for countries like Georgia and Ukraine to join the alliance when nobody else in Europe was doing so. But clearly, Erdogan is taking advantage of this situation, keeping in mind the political context inside Turkey. They have elections coming up. These are going to be close elections for President Erdogan. If he wins, this will be his last term in office if he follows his constitution, and he will have a fresh mandate and a lot of maneuverability and flexibility on complex issues like Sweden and Finland joining NATO. So I'm optimistic this will happen. On your point about Kosovo, you make a very valid point. But again, it goes back, your question, the premise of your question is that, the way I heard it, is that NATO has a role in resolving this difference. I think it's 5 countries inside NATO, 4 or 5, don't recognize Kosovo. I believe Spain is one. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Spain is one. But this is a matter for the sovereign member states to determine who they want to recognize as sovereign states. And NATO, as an intergovernmental security alliance, doesn't really have the mandate to try to increase recognition of Kosovo. NATO has a mandate to protect Kosovo, and the members of NATO who don't recognize Kosovo still gave this mandate to NATO to do so. So I think it's if we can see a normalization between Kosovo and Serbia, I think this will really help with this issue of non-recognition by some of the members of NATO. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
Hi. As you said, that there are not that many countries available to join NATO, but as far as I know, Ireland is not a part of the NATO, and it's not a too problematic country. It has good relationship with the US. Do you think it's possible that Ireland joins the NATO in a close future? And why is it not in the NATO yet?
Well, that's a matter for the Irish people. They really cherish their neutrality, military neutrality, I should say. If you remember the debates over the constitutional treaty and the Lisbon Treaty in Ireland, one of the main areas of contention was over some of the defense mechanisms in the Lisbon Treaty, in particular, Article 42.7, I think, the EU's mutual defense clause, 42.7, yes. It doesn't quite roll off the tongue like Article 5, but there was concern that this provision inside the Lisbon Treaty would invalidate Ireland's neutrality. But Ireland does participate in peacekeeping missions through the UN. Also, I have participated in CSDP missions. I think, well, there's nothing stopping Ireland from joining NATO. Legally speaking, there's nothing from NATO's point of view that would stop. As I said, Article 10 of the 1949 treaty says any new country has to be European. Ireland is clearly a European country. Perhaps we will see a change in attitude when Finland and Sweden join NATO. Maybe countries like Austria, countries like Ireland, countries like Malta will maybe think differently about their position and their potential role in Europe's security. So we'll have to see what happens, but I don't think it will happen anytime soon. But if Ireland tomorrow said, I would love to join NATO, I bet they would be in very quickly.
I wonder.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mr. Coffey, I have one question for you, and it's that given Morocco's belligerent migratory policy toward Spanish borders, how does the preferential policy of the United States towards Rabat affect and fit in with what we are talking here about common policy of defense within the NATO? Thank you.
The United States and Morocco have a very old and close relationship, and while I don't speak for the U.S. government, but I can tell you my view as an American. We have to. You can ask Nicole; she's sitting right there. No, I'm just joking. But the United States recognizes, of course, that different countries have different bilateral relationships and bilateral disputes with other countries. This doesn't mean that we can't overcome this or work around it or find ways to cooperate. Arguably, you could make a similar argument with the United Kingdom and Spain over the issue of Gibraltar. But the US and NATO still finds ways to work around this very contentious issue. So from an American's point of view, Morocco has been a very good partner. It's the first African country, for example, to give tanks to Ukraine. It's largely supportive and aligned with US positions at the United Nations and on the global stage. But of course, because the United States is friendly with both Spain and Morocco, we have to be aware of these sensitivities and do our best to try to bring all sides together for cooperation and continue cooperating with each country individually if we have to.
More? Irene.
My question is regarding cooperation in Asia. As you said, it's not possible that a country outside Europe joins NATO, but wouldn't it be very beneficial to have a stronger cooperation with Asian countries?
Of course, it would. NATO has done quite a bit to improve its relations with South Korea, Japan, Australia, of course, Singapore, to a certain extent. But NATO needs to, in my opinion, maintain its focus in the North Atlantic area, north of the Tropic of Cancer. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of Article 6 of the 1949 treaty, which I already mentioned, highlights where NATO's area of responsibility is. There are many people who argue that NATO should be playing a more active role in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, because of China. While the certain members of NATO have interests in the Indo-Pacific and an interest in deterring China, NATO as an institution is not a very good organization to deal with these challenges. Again, until China poses a military threat to NATO in the North Atlantic area, north of the Tropic of Cancer, NATO should probably have very little to deal with China, because NATO is a military security alliance. And right now, many of the challenges that Europe faces when it comes to China is over 5G technology, questionable investments in key infrastructure like ports and railways and motorways and airfields. And NATO lacks the policy competencies to deal with any of this. NATO cannot stop or block a Chinese investment into a port. NATO cannot create its own, 5G network to compete against Huawei. NATO is a security alliance, and sometimes we forget this. We need to stop wanting NATO to do things it was never designed to do and find other ways to confront some of these challenges, like China.
Anything else? No one? You?
So, knowing that the United States role in international relations is changing and it's losing its hegemonic situation, and also knowing that we're developing common defense program in the European Union, and some countries want to even create an European army. Why should we care or spend our effort in NATO as organization that it's no longer facing the problems that we have as Europeans? So, for example, the rising role of China, or as they said, the situation in the Spanish southern border, because I agree with the thing that you said. The thing that you said about maybe the relation between the U.S. and United Kingdom, and that Spain still have a problem with the United Kingdom because of Gibraltar, but I think it's not comparable with the situation between Spain and Morocco over Ceuta and Melilla, and also about the Sahara. So I think we are not heard in NATO as a country or interest, and as a wide thing, as Europe is not being heard in NATO. So why we should be spending our money and efforts in something that it's not being, like, I don't know how to say that.
Yeah,
I think
I understand. Yeah. NATO is the most successful security alliance probably in history. The only thing that has stopped Russia from advancing further into Eastern Europe and into Central Europe is NATO. The NATO has brought stability and peace to the European continent in a way that historically is unprecedented. This prosperity and this peace that NATO has brought to Europe has created unprecedentedly high economic prosperity across the continent. I would say these are the reasons why NATO matters to Europe. I would also disagree that Spain's voice isn't heard in NATO. Spain is one of the biggest countries in the alliance. You just hosted the summit, and let me tell you, it takes a lot of backroom bargaining to host a summit. So clearly, Spain, was able to exert its influence in that way. There's no such thing as a NATO military or an EU military. You have the militaries of each member state combined that work together on a state-by-state basis. And NATO has a proven record of cooperation and of working together. And I think that NATO, in terms of security, NATO is the best tool that can be used on military issues. But on other issues that are non-military in nature, then perhaps it's the EU that can play a better role because it has legislative competencies in areas that NATO doesn't, for example. But at the end of the day, nobody is forcing a country to remain in NATO. If you know, the people of Spain, and I hope they don't, because I think Spain is a very important member in NATO, and especially for the US, with our forward presence in Europe. But if someday the Spanish people decide they want to leave NATO, no one's forcing you to stay. And again, I hope it doesn't come to that. But I do believe that in the current situation around the world, especially in the North Atlantic area, NATO is the most effective tool to deter military aggression.
I'm going to take the opportunity to say something, if I may. Yeah. Well, I understand the critics about NATO and the role and the interest of Spain in NATO. But on the other hand, I saw the words of Luke about the strategic autonomy in the European Union. No, and only a question: how do you expect to carry out strategic autonomy if you depend on energy from your greater adversary, that is Russia? This is that end idea, no, for the beginning. And on the other hand, you have NATO. NATO is true that even technically and legally have problems in order to help Spain in the case of a military problem in southern Melilla. But as to a certain point, collective defense works very well if deterrence work. What do I mean with deterrence? Deterrence in general terms, not nuclear deterrence or conventional deterrence. I mean in general terms. Now, if you have credibility, no, deterrence is based in credibility, capacity, and communication. Then, if you are able to communicate very well and you are credible, and then politically and militarily, you are going to help a lot to Spain. No, and that's why Spain still maintain his membership in NATO. No, and then it's a difficult issue about all for Spain, and that's why we have been talking and working a lot about North Africa and with the problems with Morocco, and with Algeria last year, no, in different areas. But take into account that it's better to stay in NATO and European Union, and in order to maintain security. If you can imagine if NATO don't exist, and we return to the concept of powers at the 19th century in Europe, and it could be terrible for Europe. It's terrible now with NATO and European Union, and you can imagine, no? Then I think it's a matter sometimes of credibility and political credibility for NATO. No, that's why I was talking about at the beginning about this idea of the new strategic concept and the 80 words and the 2 paragraphs. Now about that, but you have to think that this is very successful alliance. No, why? Because well, we're better off with NATO. No, I always invite the people to think, okay, think in Europe now without the treaties of disarmament in nuclear weapons and all conventional weapons, and think in Europe without all this and without NATO. Then could be very terrible, no? Seeing what's going on in Ukraine now, no? This is the issue, no? And then that's why even if we are critics, very critic with certain position in politics, we have to take into account always this, no? And it is this international liberal order we had to fight for, because if not, it's a jungle. And that's the point, really. No? Well, very dramatic commentary, but it's okay. If you don't, you have more questions? Yeah.
Hello, thank you for coming here, Luke. And the question that I have is that, for example, the US has also is loyal to the NATO, but also is loyal to Morocco. And in the same way, Morocco doesn't recognize the sovereignty of Spain over Ceuta and Melilla. In fact, in la ONU, the United Nations, they always say that it's from theirs and that it's a colony from us. In that way, also, we can think that maybe the Greek population has some fear with Turkey and some island in the Mediterranean. In case that, knowing that the people who most have killed the Europeans in the last century has been the Europeans, a system who joins all the European in one team, for saying some way, and also the US is the leader of the team, for saying some way, how can the European feel safety? Because in case of some aggression, some war, we don't know the US who is going to be with.
I think I got the question. Your concern is that because the United States has a relationship with Morocco, you are worried that if Spain went to war with Morocco, you wouldn't know which side the United States would choose. Is this correct?
Yes, but also, for example, a fight between Portugal and Spain, because traditionally Europe has the most problems with their own neighbors in Europe.
With Portugal and Spain, yeah.
For example, or Turkey
Yeah.
with the Greeks, that also have been a usual fight in the history.
Yeah. Well, the fact that many of these European countries are in NATO would force the United States to play a leadership role to try to cool down tensions or to try to bring different parties to the negotiating table. I think these are very hypothetical situations, if I'm honest with you. I cannot imagine a situation where Spain and Portugal, I know there's like a disputed city or village or something. I forgot the name of it, but I don't think this is going to cause a war in the Iberian Peninsula that the United States is going to have to pick sides. Even in the past, whenever NATO member like Turkey it went into Cyprus in the 70s, the United States applied economic sanctions, even though Turkey was a member of NATO, and we still found ways to cooperate with Turkey, even though Cyprus wasn't a member of NATO. So this is a complex world we live in. It's not black or white, but I don't think I just don't think Spain has anything to fear when it comes to the United States because of any disputes that you might have with your neighbors. I think it's purely hypothetical. It's a hypothetical exercise. It might make for an interesting intellectual exercise, but it's purely hypothetical and not really grounded in reality. I can almost guarantee the US is not going to get involved in a military conflict between Spain and Morocco, unless, if Morocco attacks Spain, parts of Spain that are under Article 5 protection, and then NATO as an alliance invokes Article 5, then the US would be obligated to get involved. But the whole question about Sutan Miela not being under Article 5, and this is a whole nother, like, this could be a topic of another conference that we could discuss. But don't worry, I'm confident that the US and Spain's relationship is very close and very good, and you have nothing to worry about.
Two more questions there. Last one, because we have to finish and sorry.
Good afternoon. This is a really specific and quick question, and it's mainly directed to Professors Cantalapiedra or Professor Barras about what we were speaking before about some problems or main problems in the North African region. The thing I'm most concerned about is the ungoverned areas or places in most of those countries. For example, I know Nigeria has big problems with ungoverned territories, especially with Boko Haram influence. So I was wondering, what could possibly NATO do about these kind of things, except of planting military bases or trying to control borders that are already a mess? So that's a really specific question I was wondering. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, interesting question. And then I think that one of the most difficult, as our speaker said before, NATO may not a lot of involved in the South because maybe has no idea how to deal with these problems. I think that there is the first thing in these countries is the stability. And of course that we need to rethink about how to stabilize these countries after Afghanistan experience, after 20 years of expenditure and infrastructure and resources to put in the effort in rebuilding a nation was collapsed and was a real problem. And we found the same in Mali with in 2012 with this asking of help of the Malian government to France. France put a lot of effort. These two big military operation, first Herbal and then Barkhane. And there is I think that there is one. I mean, not one problem only, but there is a lot of problem. One is the ¿cómo llamamos en inglés el relato? I can say that. The narrative. One is the narrative. The West is losing the narrative because there are other narratives. I say in my intervention, Russia is doing another narrative and with another key actors such as Wagner group in the region that supply these military efforts in the region that has been done by France. Now it's doing by Wagner. So first of all, losing the narrative, then and linked to the narrative also we European Union but also the West don't know how to offer our combination of develop and human rights democracy package, because there are another actor like China that offered that money not in the same terms like Europe, but more eager and with no or with any conditions. We have a lot of agreements, I think in the Cotonou, Lomé 1, 2, 3, with the all of ACP countries, and we ask for conditionality. And we have now another actors we didn't have before that they didn't ask for any kind of conditionality. They put the money and the triple. They can do that. And so again, I think that this linked also with this narrative. And how NATO can do that? I think that NATO is more worried in the south because this penetration of Russia and also penetration of China. So after Libya, of course, we didn't found again another intervention in the same terms, or at least don't operate by the United Nations Security Council. So I think that this alliance that our speakers say before, a specific alliance with the specific countries, NATO is working with Mauritania, NATO is working also with Niger. But the problem is that, yeah, we were working before with Mali and with other governments, but one day you wake up and coup d'etat, change of government or a military. So first found a real partners for doing any link in a long way term, and for that reason is that it's so important Morocco for United States in the region. Also, if Spain has problem, particularly with them. And any ideas, David or Professor? Or
no, I think you're right. And then the problem still for NATO is how to operate in the area that's out of area, really. Then militarily is very difficult without the authorization of the Security Council, you know. But still the problem is stability. And then it is an area, it's very, very important for NATO. Not probably because of our position, no, in terms of security dynamic and the problem of terrorism, the problem of organized crime, but because of the penetration of Russia and China. No, then this is a new issue for NATO, and then maybe we have to take a look to the area from using this point of view, no? And even though we have to see, taking into account the current problems, no, the corruption, traffics, and any kind of traffic, probably in the future is going to be more important for NATO because of the presence of Russia and NATO and China. No? This is really a problem in medium term, I think. No, and the position of Russia in certain countries like Mali or something like that. And this is important for NATO then to look again in the area, no? and dedicate more than 80 words and 2 paragraphs. Not only in the strategic concept, but it's like the European Compass. No? The European Compass, it was a brain death document because of the war in Ukraine. No? And then this is very problematic. Things are running, and you don't have time to think strategically. That is a real problem. No, it's things are happening, are not black and white, and then it's very difficult. No? Okay. Any other question? Last one.
Thank you. I'll try to be short. Before you said something related with NATO, it's not obligated to act in issues that are not related with military issues. But I was wondering, nowadays we have like different threats, like this is called hybrid war and everything related with this. For example, cyber terrorism, online recruiting, misinformation, deep fakes, you know. I was wondering if the NATO is going to, or it's already have any kind of posture, official posture against this kind of threats, because those are related with the NATO members. And if they don't have yet this kind of official posture, if they are developing any kind of plan, any kind of idea to fight against these new threats. Thank you.
Thank you. NATO has to be one tool in the toolbox to confront all of these different challenges. It can't be the sole focus or the main effort because of the reasons I already stated. You mentioned hybrid warfare, misinformation, these cyber, this sort of thing. But NATO is an intergovernmental security alliance. It doesn't have the tools to deal with these challenges. And I think this is why there's always so much disappointment for NATO, because we all want NATO to do everything, but it's not designed to do everything. It's designed to defend the territory of its member states. That's what it's designed to do. The members of NATO have more legislative authorities to deal with some of these challenges. So does the EU, but NATO just simply doesn't. Take counterterrorism as a good example. I remember President Trump wanted to make NATO into a counterterrorism force, but the use of military force to fight terrorism is only one component of a counterterrorism strategy. You have to have a law enforcement component. You have to have intelligence component. You have to have immigration and border control. You have to have financing, the freezing of terrorist financing and bank accounts. NATO can't do any of this. It doesn't have the legislative powers to do this. So I think we have to be realistic about what we want NATO to do. And then I think we'll be a lot happier with the alliance. Even after September 11th, when Article 5 was invoked for the first and only time, after NATO invoked Article 5, there were two missions that were Article 5 NATO missions, and Afghanistan was not one of them. Many people think NATO's presence in Afghanistan was a result of Article 5. It wasn't. The two missions were one called Operation Eagle Assist, and that was an operation where immediately after 9/11, the European air surveillance planes flew to North America to provide air surveillance of the skies in the aftermath of the terrorist attack. And then another one was Operation Active Endeavor, which was a maritime counterterrorism operation in the Eastern Med. So even when you look at the example of Article 5 being used because of a terrorist attack, NATO's actual Article 5 response was quite limited because it only had certain capabilities that it could employ.
Okay, then we are going to finish the debate, and I would like to thank Luke for being with us and to share this debate with the students. Some questions has been very straightforward, and I would like to thank you for your kindness and your patience with us and with our English sometimes.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to participate and to be asked. And I wish all of the students good luck and success in their studies. And if you have any follow-on questions, or if you want to talk about anything else, I can be reached on Twitter or through the hudson.org website.
I hope we can reach soon, and I hope to try to work together with you and the Hudson Institute. Thank you very much, Luke, for being with us.
Thank you.
And I think Marta wants to explain You, I don't know if to change to Spanish.
No, it's okay. You
It's-
want me
it's
to
okay.
say it in English?
No, I think for them.
Ah, vale. Como-
Ella va a explicaros en qué consiste el concurso de Defensa y Yo. Está muy bien, que yo lo sé porque otros alumnos han participado y han hecho un montón. Ahora os lo va a explicar ella mucho mejor que yo. Así que
Bueno,
no me
muchas
callo.
gracias
Venga,
David,
nada.
Raquel y a la universidad, también a Nicole, a la Embajada de Estados Unidos, que sin ellos este evento y este programa no sería posible. Bueno, este ya es el tercer año que realizamos Defensa y Yo, que es un programa que intenta pues eso, promover la cultura de la defensa y también el diálogo alrededor de cuestiones de seguridad dentro de pues eso, la juventud española. Y este programa pues, está abierto a 16 universidades, en concreto también está incluida la Universidad Complutense. Habrá un ganador por universidad porque está formado también por un concurso en el que podéis participar. Tenéis las bases, las instrucciones de este concurso en nuestra web, que es esglobal.org. Y básicamente desde el día de hoy tendríais un mes para participar mandándonos una redacción, un vídeo, un podcast o un recurso visual alrededor del tema que hemos tratado hoy. Y bueno, el premio la verdad que es bastante apetecible, como bien ha comentado también David, es un viaje a Bruselas para conocer la base de la OTAN. Podréis también mantener conversaciones bastante interesantes con personal de alto nivel, tanto militar como político y diplomático. Viajarían con vosotros personal de Desglobal y de la Embajada. Y pues yo os animo a participar en ello y también a que le echéis un vistazo a la web de Desglobal, que también pienso que podéis encontrar cosas interesantes y aplicarlas también dentro de vuestro grado. Así que nada, muchas gracias por participar y por venir.
Pues muchas gracias a todos y thank you very much, Nicole, for coming.
Yeah.
Marta, Beatriz. We did it again. Y gracias a todos vosotros por venir. Ya hablaremos de ello un poquito en clase, ¿vale? Muchas gracias.